So thank you, friends, for your patience. We apologize for that technical snafu. Welcome to our friends from Canada and across the world. It's a pleasure to be joined by our MK Gilad Kariv, who is going to tell us a lot about what is going on this morning. But before we hear from him, I just want to thank our friends at ARZA Canada for their support. And I want to make the pitch once more for the support for the emergency fund for the IMPJ Iraq campaign that's going on at the moment. 50% of it goes to maintaining and increasing programming for progressive Judaism in Israel due to the government freeze, and 50% goes to the work of Iraq in all of its aspects of the intense struggle now to maintain and nurture Israel's democracy. You can find that link here in the chat, and you can also find it on our webpage and on ARZA Canada's webpage. And so there is a lot to be done, and we thank you very much for your help in that. I'm going to hand things over, since I know we're delayed, directly to our past president, David Baskin, who is going to welcome and introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Rabbi K, and I'm not going to talk for very long. About 30 years ago, Rabbi Gunter Plaut of blessed memory gave a sermon that is still with me today. Reformed Jews, he said, have nothing for which they should apologize. They should not feel less Jewish, less religious, or less legitimate than Orthodox Jews. Reformed Jews, he said, have it right. We have adopted Judaism to the world as it is today. We are not trying to live in the world of yesterday. Reformed Jews, wherever they live and worship, must be accepted as being just as Jewish, just as holy as any other Jew, be it in Canada, Israel, or elsewhere. My wife, Joan Garson, and I would often visit the late Rabbi Dov Marmer when we were in Jerusalem. Dov accepted Rabbi Plaut's words, but was very skeptical about the possibility of Reformed Judaism making much of an impact in Israel. He felt that the entrenched position of the Orthodox establishment, coupled with the broadly secular majority of Israelis, would make it almost impossible for liberal Judaism to sink roots in our homeland. With the greatest of respect for Rabbi Marmer, he did not take into account Rabbi Gilad Kariv and his growing group of Israeli-born and Israeli-trained Reform rabbis. As executive director of the Israeli Movement for Progressive Judaism from 2009 to 2020, Rabbi Kariv worked hard to build Reform Judaism in Israel. The more than 50 Reform congregations now active in Israel are a living testament to his success. The thousands of Israelis who attend Reform-run preschool and school programs, who attend Reform services and Simchat, are growing a new Eitz Chaim, one with deep and broad roots. Gilad has been a member of the Knesset since 2021, and his biography makes him uniquely suited to his role in fighting the right-wing nationalist and religiously extremist agenda of the Netanyahu government. A former an IDF intelligence officer, a member of the Israeli Bar, the holder of a master's degree in constitutional law, an ordained rabbi, his qualifications speak for themselves, but they do not speak as loudly as his actions. Gilad has been a tireless and effective advocate for responsible democratic and representative government in Israel. He has soldiered on in the face of implacable, aggressive, and open hostility and disparagement that would cause a lesser person to retreat in despair. Nobody is in a better position to speak to us today about the current situation in Israel. And on top of all that, he married my daughter. So please welcome our friend and teacher, Rabbi Gilad Kariv.
Toda, David. Thank you, David, for your kind words. Rabbi K, thank you for leading this session, and I want to thank, of course, your wonderful congregation, Holy Blossom, and ARZA Canada for organizing this opportunity for me to address the community, and more important, for your long-standing support for the growth of our movement in Israel, and your support for our long battle towards religious pluralism, equality, and religious tolerance in Israel. David, I want to thank you and John for being my friends and friends of my family, and for your leadership in the Jewish world, in our global reform and progressive family, and in this circle of friends around the world that identify the importance of our work in Israel. So thank you, David, not only for your kind introduction. Friends, first of all, Chag Sameach, Moadim Lesimcha. It's wonderful to be able to wish you and to wish us all Shana Tova. Definitely, we need it here in Israel. I will share with you few thoughts, few remarks in regard to the current situation in Israel, and I will make sure that most of our time will be left for questions and answers, and I will try to address as many questions as we can in this 1 hour session. I want to address three points, or to share with you three thoughts about the current situation. And I assume that in the last 9 months, many of you followed the news from Israel and followed the troubling developments in our political system and in the relations between our different branches of government. I hope that all of you were encouraged, as we are, from this unprecedented wave of democratic protest that continues for more than 9 months now. And I'm sure you identified in this protest, as we do, a very strong and promising commitment of hundreds of thousands of Israelis, if not millions of Israelis, to the core values of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. So I'm not going to go back 9 months ago and, to start from Bereshit, from the beginning of this judiciary coup. I will address the current developments, and if you want me to go back, please do it through your questions. The first analysis or thought I want to share with you has to do with the achievements of the protest and why we are still deeply concerned. One thing we can say is that the social protest, the democratic process, succeeded to do two things. First of all, it dramatically succeeded to delay the plans of Israel's government to change the nature of relations between the different branches of governments and to change our constitutional system of check and balances. And I can tell you and share with you, because I really know the details, that they planned to finish this judicial reform in less than 4 months, in order to allow them to move to the other parts of their bigger plan, and I will address this bigger plan, and they failed to do it. And they failed to do it mainly because of this massive wave of protest that succeeded not only to assemble again millions of Israelis, according to different surveys, Today, more than 2.5 million Israelis were involved in different levels with this democratic protest. They also succeeded to attract the attention of other Western societies, governments, and establishments, mainly in North America. And this combination of our local domestic pressure with the growing awareness of friendly governments actually forced the coalition and the government to delay their or to slow the pace of their plans. The other thing that we can already say, the other achievement, is that it is quite clear that the government and the coalition today understand that they will not be able to fully implement their original plans. It is quite clear that some of the elements that were presented in a very aggressive manner at the beginning of this judicial coup are left aside. And it's not only about a slower timeline, it is quite clear that some of the elements will not be implemented. Now, why we cannot rejoice and why we cannot be satisfied with those two important achievements? Mainly because those elements that are still on the agenda of the coalition are serious enough and can create a serious and a dramatic damage to the very sensitive constitutional system in Israel. And here we need to say something about the Israeli democracy. I believe
So it looks like Gilad has disconnected. We'll get him back in just a moment. I hope that what this does, this whole thing, there he is gives us a great appreciation for coming to programming in person at the synagogue, and really gives you back that joy of Kehila Kedosha and of being all together as a community. That as great as it is to have the ability to make someone really.
I'm back, friends.
We're back. The joy of community in person. Yeah.
So I'm going. I hope it was not a sign that I need to end my opening remarks, but I started to say, and for me, this is a very important message to convey. I always believed that the Israeli democracy is quite strong, and I still believe that, not like in other European countries and other countries in different parts of the world, Israel does have a long-standing democratic tradition that is rooted in the history of the Zionist movement, and it also the outcome of the fact that the British Empire played a role before the establishment of the state, and the concept of democracy is well rooted in the Israeli society. Yet, for different reasons, Israel's democracy is quite thin. The constitutional structures that we have are quite simple and, again, thin. Just think about the distribution of governmental powers in Canada between the federal administration and the different provinces. We don't have it in Israel. And many other mechanisms that today are quite common in Western democracies, for example, two chambers of the parliament, those mechanisms that create by definition a stronger, a more developed, a thicker system of check and balances between the different branches of government, those mechanisms, for different reasons, do not exist in Israel. When you add to it the fact that we don't have a written constitution and a very strong and veteran constitutional tradition, it leads us to this understanding that, yes, there is a well-developed democratic culture in Israel, yet when it comes to the strength of our democratic structures, we cannot, we need to be alerted. And when this is the situation, sometimes even, small amendments that are being done in a way which is not sensitive to this structural weakness of the Israeli democracy can lead or can create an enormous damage. When you understand that because of this thin democratic structure, the Israeli Supreme Court is playing a very important role in protecting human rights and in balancing the might of the executive branch, you understand that any change in the modus vivendi of the Israeli Supreme Court that is done without suggesting any alternatives, how to strengthen this system of check and balances, it can definitely lead to a major constitutional and democratic crisis. And when the supporters of this judiciary coup, the Ministry of Justice, the current chair of the Knesset Constitutional Committee, Netanyahu himself, many others, are claiming or claim that, in international standards, those amendments are not so dramatic, they ignore on purpose the fact that Israel doesn't meet most of the international constitutional standards for a well-established and well-structured democracy. And one of the important things that we need to identify in regard to this judiciary coup is that we're not talking about replacing the current system of check and balances with other mechanisms. It's not that the government suggests in a way to lower the constitutional strength of the Israeli Supreme Court, but in exchange to strengthen the legislative branch. They're actually talking only about lowering the bars that set red lines to the, or borders, set borders to the ability of the executive branch of the government to operate, and also operate in a way that breaches fundamental democratic principles. And this is the main problem that we have with this judicial reform. It goes only in one direction, to enable the government to release itself from some of those fundamental democratic standards. And again, because of the thin structure of the Israeli democracy, with few amendments in the way we structure the Israeli Supreme Court and its constitutional authority, or in the way that the Attorney General operates in Israel, you can actually create a mega shift in the democratic character of the State of Israel. That's my first thought or remark I want to share with you. We can celebrate some major achievements of the democratic protest, but we really need to be still fully alerted, because even through a handful amendments in the democratic constitutional structure of Israel, you can create an enormous damage. My second remark has to do more with our joint alliance and our values as progressive Jews. And here we need to say in a very clear way that during those 9 months, something changed in the way Israelis today understand the current debate. When the protests started, it was very clear that it is all about, and in a way only about, the democratic standards of Israel and the desire of the government to establish some amendments in the relations between the different branches of government. But slowly, and in a promising way from our perspective, more and more Israelis started to understand that we're not only talking and arguing about the democratic leg of the state of Israel, but at the same time, we are also arguing, and in a way, even maybe mainly arguing, the Jewish leg of our state. And when you follow the music of the protest, when you follow the main motives of the protest, and when you look carefully at the discourse of the government, the coalition, and those communities that support the protest, you see that we shifted from a public discourse that is all about the Western standards of democracy to the basic questions of what it means to have a Jewish state. And today I can suggest that sometimes on Saturday evenings, on Motzei Shabbat, when we go to the streets, you mainly hear speeches not about the Israeli Supreme Court, but about the Orthodox monopoly and the way we, again, protect this concept that Israel is not a theocracy, and that the meaning of having a Jewish state is not to have a state that follows the traditional Jewish law. And it even goes to the most fundamental Zionist values and brands. And I will give you one example. In this historic, unprecedented hearing in the Israeli Supreme Court, when for the first time all 15 Supreme Court judges sat together to hear this constitutional case against the basic law that canceled the reasonability doctrine, which is an important part of our administrative law. One of the most important moments were when the attorney of the government said that in the end, Israel's declaration of independence should not play a very important role in the Israeli constitutional law. That in the end, it was drafted in a very rapid way, and the 37 people that signed this Declaration of Independence, people that we see as the founding fathers and mothers of the State of Israel, were elected in a strange way, or not in a democratic fashion, or in a way that represents the founding generation of Israel. Put aside the fact that those are fake facts. We need, We are in an era of dealing with fake news and fake facts, but leave aside the historic debate. And this attorney is totally wrong if you know the history of the establishment of the State of Israel, but it tells you something about the discourse, the Zionist and the Jewish discourse of this government. Today, instead of talking about Israel's declaration of independence as the base for our understanding what it means to have a sovereign Jewish state, this coalition, this government is waving with the nation state bill that they legislated few years ago. And actually, there is a serious debate today about the Jewish nature of Israel. And it means that we, as one of the players, one of the leading players in this important developing arena of pluralistic Israeli Judaism, of progressive Israeli Judaism. In our case, we are, of course, talking on behalf of the global family of Reform Jews, but it means that we have a very important role a role to play. And, in a very personal way, and I'm addressing, Israeli crowds in the last 40 weeks, every Saturday evening in different places around Israel, from the north to the south. And I shared with my team a few days ago, and we checked it, and we saw that this feeling is well-based, that in my first speeches in those massive demonstrations, I was mainly addressed as an opposition member and as someone that represents his party in the Knesset Constitutional Committee, the committee that I chaired in the previous term, and now I'm one of the leaders of the opposition in this committee. And this committee is the main, committee for this judicial or constitutional debate. So at the beginning of the protest, I was mainly presented as one of the most vocal voices of the political opposition in this committee. And slowly, and I see it in the way I'm being introduced on the stages of the protest, slowly it is shifting towards my rabbinical title. And we celebrated Rosh Hashanah on Sunday, on Friday evening, on Erev Shabbat. The first day of Rosh Hashanah was Saturday. A week before, I addressed the demonstrators in the city of Netanya, and the organizers of this demonstration asked me to bring my shofar with me and to conclude my speech about the judicial coup and about the constitutional amendments with blowing the shofar. And it tells you something about the way more and more Israelis from the two sides, understand this moment, and why it is so critical that we will be deeply involved in this democratic protest and in this effort to protect the core values of Israel's Declaration of Independence that is right behind me, because this is not only a democratic moment, it is also a profound Jewish and Zionist movement. My last remark, and it will be short, and we'll open it for your questions. After 9 months of protest, I think that more and more we understand that it's going to be a long battle. And we are more and more called to think about how we sustain the resilience of those different circles of protest, mainly because we understand that it's not going to be a short journey. And many of us in a way which is well based, linkage the current developments to Bibi Netanyahu, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he definitely is definitely playing a very critical role in this dramatic moment in Israel. But it is not only about him. And one of the things that we learn and we understand today in a more profound way, that definitely Netanyahu is a catalyst to many of those things and developments, but it goes much beyond his political personality, his political agenda, and his personal agenda. And it means that it will not end with a different prime minister from the right. That there is a constitutional, a democratic, and from our perspective also a Jewish crisis in Israel. I really believe that the majority of Israelis are with us in the long run, and that we are in a different situation from some of the East European countries that do not have a well-established democratic culture. Yet we need to understand that this is going to be a very long journey. It will not end in the next elections. And if it ends in the next election because there will be a different government, it doesn't mean that it will not repeat itself in the elections that will follow it. And it means that while we really need to strengthen the current courageous wave of protest, we also need to think about how we strengthen, reestablish, and identifying the new infrastructures we need in order to sustain the Israeli liberal democratic camp in Israel. And in many ways, the current situation in Israel is a result of the fact that for a few decades, in a way for the last 40 years, while many liberal Israelis succeeded to push the Israeli economy forward, we neglected the need to strengthen, to build, to invent the necessary educational, communal, social, and political infrastructures that will keep our values relevant to the majority of Israelis. And at the same time, we need to be fully tuned to the ongoing wave of protest and to the current developments. But slowly we need to find the time, the energy, the resources also to reestablish those infrastructures that disappeared. And here again, I strongly believe that the Israeli reform movement, the IMPJ, and its public affairs arm, the Israel Religious Action Center, play a very critical role in rebuilding and sustaining the Israeli liberal camp. And it has also, of course, political effects, or it needs to reveal itself also in the political arena. I'll be happy to address it. We cannot allow ourselves to repeat the mistakes that our democratic bloc did towards the previous elections, and we really need to rethink the way we organize our political camp aside those communal and social and educational infrastructures. Rabbi, I will end here my opening remarks, and I'll be glad to address your questions. And again, I want to thank you all for the long-standing friendship of your congregation with our movement in Israel, its congregations. I can tell you that Rabbi Splansky's sermon about Israel and the situation in Israel touched our hearts. It was well distributed, not only among the circles of the Israeli reform movement, but also among many circles of the Israeli democratic protest.
Thank you so much. Quick round of applause from those of you gathered online, those of us who are here. Really, for speaking and educating us so brilliantly. And for those of you who hadn't had the chance to see the sermon that Rabbi Splansky gave on Kol Nidre that Gilad just addressed, it is on our YouTube channel. And I hope that you'll have a chance to watch it at some point. We have some pre-submitted questions. There's some questions in the chat. I think the question that's on everyone's mind, though, at least for us here in Canada, is you're talking about resilience, the resilience of the protesters, the resilience of Israelis. But what about us in the diaspora? What can we do to be of assistance to our Israeli brothers and sisters in order to continue to protect Israeli democracy?
So thank you for raising this question, because it reflects your deep concern and attachment to the state of Israel, to Zionism, and to your partners here in Israel. When I'm saying that this wave of democratic protest is unprecedented, it has to do with the numbers of Israelis that are going to the streets every week. It has to do with the fact that, it goes on for 9 months. And it has to do with the fact that it brought together so many different circles of Israelis, IDF veterans and ITAC engineers and social workers and people from the academy and from the cultural world, and it's all around us. But there is another element that makes this protest unprecedented, and that is the involvement of a world jury and Israelis, expats who live overseas. And I know that it is not always big in its numbers, but the fact that every week in more than 40 different North American locations, you have groups of Israelis and North American Jews that come together, it has an enormous impact, both on the well-being of the Israeli protest, and you saw it when Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the president of the Union of Reform Judaism, was invited to speak from the main stage in Kaplan Street, the main demonstration, in front of an audience of 150,000 Israelis. I'm not being invited to the main stage in Kaplan Street, and my good friend Rabbi Rick Jacobs from New York was invited, and he was invited because it is not obvious for me that all of you are fully aware to the positive impact of your involvement on the well-being of the Israelis in this protest. And every time that, I attended some of those unacceptable demonstrations. This is the title of those North American pro-Israeli democracy demonstrations that are taking place in the last 9 months. I was in San Francisco, and I attended a demonstration of 200 people. Many of them were members of our congregations in the Bay Area. But the impact on the Israeli crowd was amazing. When I shared it in my Facebook page, there were hundreds of positive comments about it. Israelis want to feel that you are with us in different ways, because again, Israelis understand this is not only a democratic moment, it's also a Jewish moment. And we know for sure, I hear it from American, Canadian, European politicians. We hear that your local awareness, your local pressure helps to bring your governments to be tuned to those developments. And please keep in mind, God bless Canada, that you're not facing this same situation, but please keep in mind that your southern neighbor and that many European countries are facing, in a way, similar challenges. And we understand this is part of a global disturbing phenomena. And many Western governments are becoming more and more tuned to the developments in Israel, and you can help them to become more tuned. After saying that, I want to say that in the end, it is clear that the government is using the strength of a government in order to push this judicial coup. And governments, I always say that the State of Israel is the largest Jewish NGO in the world. And we have a budget of 500 billion new Israeli shekels, okay? And when a government is actually using, the force of the civil service, the all government agencies in order to push this judicial coup, it means that this is an unbalanced battle. And it means that the civil society in Israel needs to do a lot in order to fight back. And here again, we need the support of our friends overseas, the organizational support, the political support. I'm mentioning again ARZA Canada. Don't underestimate the Zionist international institutions. They are still relevant, and they are one of your venues to create an impact. And yes, we need your help in building those long-term infrastructures, because the battle will not end in the coming few weeks and months. And in the end, when you establish a new Reform congregation in a city that doesn't have an egalitarian a Jewish congregation, and when you add another constitutional attorney to the team of the Israeli Religious Action Center, you are building those infrastructures. And today I'm not the president of the IMPJ anymore. I'm not the director of IRAC, so I really feel comfortable to add my voice and to ask all of you to identify the Israeli Reform Movement, the IMPJ, and the Israeli Religious Action Center as your shlichim, your ambassadors in this big fight over the future of Israel, which is also the fight over the future of Zionism. And I also think the battle over the character of Judaism in the 21st century.
Thank you. I think the only natural follow-up to that question then is, then how do you respond to voices that say that this diaspora voice coming out doesn't have a place, or that the criticism, the diaspora voice is against Israel, as always, it's hurtful. It's not helping anyone. You're hurting Israel. You're not helping us by airing our dirty laundry in public, because this is what a lot of us are hearing.
Yeah, look, first, it is quite clear that we are talking about different levels of involvement. This is a natural thing. We expect the citizens of Israel to be much more involved in this critical situation. But it doesn't mean that diaspora Jewry doesn't have a role to play. Let me first answer your question by sharing with you, and I hope you are already fully aware to it, that Jews from the diaspora communities that are holding the opposite views about the nature of Judaism and the nature of Zionism are deeply involved in this judicial coup. They are not waiting, or they are not hesitating, right? Please keep in mind that North American philanthropic Jewish money initiated this judicial coup. In many ways, the same Jewish players, philanthropic players, that are trying to push forward ultra conservative, ultra traditional, ultra nationalist views in, for example, in the US, are trying to do the same in Israel. For example, there is no way to understand or to analyze the history of the settlement movement without the deep involvement of Jews from diaspora communities. So they are doing it, and we cannot allow ourselves to, to stay still. The second answer has to do with my second opening remark. This is not only an Israeli moment. This is a profound Jewish moment. Today, the North American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community are equal in their size. And together, we are talking about more than 90%, between 85 to 90% of all Jews around the world. It means that the future of Judaism will be set in two important centers: North America and Israel. And the same way Jerusalem could not survive without Babylon, and Babylon could not survive, Babylonian Jewry could not survive without Eretz Israel. This is the same story. Now, I understand it is more complicated to explain how the relations between the Israeli government and the Israeli Supreme Court have a huge impact on the quality of Jewish life in Toronto. But keep this in mind. The only reason why reform conversions in your congregations are recognized by the Jewish state and Jews by choice from Toronto can make Aliyah to Israel, the only reason is the constitutional stand of the Israeli Supreme Court. And one of the reasons why the ultra-Orthodox parties are backing this judicial coup is because they want to reverse our success in this field, and more than that, they want to cancel the grandchild clause in the law of return. And you need to understand in a very concrete way that if this clause in the law of return is canceled, many of your children and grandchildren cannot even consider Aliyah, but leave immigration to Israel on the side. You understand that they will not be able to join birthright groups? You understand that it will have a mega impact on the Shinshinim you have in Toronto in the end? Are those Shinshinim are going to bring with them an Israeli culture that is respectful towards different expressions of Judaism, or in the end, in 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, the Israeli public educational system will actually adopt the music, the tone of the ultra-Orthodox parties towards our communities in Israel and overseas. We are all in the same boat. It's true that right now we get wet more because the storm is in our part of the boat. but this is one boat. When the ultra-Orthodox establishment in Jerusalem gets stronger, the ultra-Orthodox establishment in Toronto and in New York is getting stronger. We don't have the time, but I can show you the channels of money and political support, and we are all connected in a very, sensitive net of relations and ties. And in the end, this is a Jewish battle and not only an Israeli battle. I think that the majority of Jews in Israel and around the world are sharing our values. It is not well translated into a political reality, and we need to close this gap.
Gilad, we can't thank you enough for opening our eyes and for spending your time with us. I want to respect your time. It is that moment. So we are going to kind of call this to a close, but I want to, before we close up, to once again to thank you, to thank ARZA Canada for making this possible, to thank David Baskin for his beautiful introduction and for your longtime friendship. I want to clarify for those who heard it, I think you performed the wedding ceremony for his daughter. You're not actually not actually your father-in-law.
That's true.
That was the murmur that went through.
I'm willing to adopt him as
as well. You should.
My good friend.
A wonderful family, a wonderful connection. We also want to lift up just a few other things that you said. Unacceptable Toronto will be in our sukkah here at Holy Blossom tomorrow. Their leadership will be in the sukkah for a lunch and learn. So if you are in Toronto, we welcome you to join us in the sukkah tomorrow at noon for lunch, and to hear from Unacceptable Toronto about their vision and goal for their continued resilience in this ongoing fight. And Orly, the executive director of IRAC, will be here in Toronto in just a few weeks, brought to us by ARZA Canada, and she'll be specifically here at Holy Blossom on October 18th. And we hope that you will come and learn from her and hear from her and be inspired by her as well. So, Gilad, Rabbi, thank you with all our hearts. Modim l'simcha, continued strength, chazak ve'emet. Just keep doing wonderful things for all the Jewish people, and especially thank you for being our champion in Israel, both in the Knesset and in the street. And we thank you and wish you nothing more than joy and success. And to all of you who joined us online, thank you very much. Those who joined us in person online. And we will send out the recording for this program to everyone who had some technical difficulties and may have missed a few moments of it as soon as we can possibly do so. So thank you again, and we will see you soon.
Toda.
Bye.